Today we're going to go through and start our geometry unit, and the first thing that we're going to look at in geometry is finding the midpoint. Now, a midpoint is just like it sounds. It's the middle point. So if you have a point over here and a point over here, this would right here be your midpoint. So in Math 1, what you're going to have is oftentimes you're going to be given, I'm going to change my color here a second. Oftentimes you're going to be given this point, and you have to use the midpoint formula basically to find this one right here. Now, sometimes you know the midpoint and one of the side points, and you have to find the other end point, etc. But we'll go through a couple examples of those. Alright, so in order to find the midpoint, your formula, basically when you have 2 points, so I'm going to say this is my x1 and y1, because it's my first x, my first y. And I'm going to say that this one is my x2, and this is my y2. So if you have 2 points, in order to find the midpoint, all you really have to do is add your 2 x's together. So in this case, our 2 x's. And we just add those together, so it'll be x1 plus x2. And you find the middle, so it just means you divide them by 2. So that's your first point. You basically just find your 2 x's, add them up, divide that number by 2. That's your midpoint, your x value of your midpoint. And we do the same kind of idea for your y values. Basically, we're just going to take our 2 y values, those 2 second points, and we're going to add them up as well and divide by 2. So our y1 plus our y2, and divide that by 2. Now, if you notice, my answer, I have these set up as an ordered pair. Your answer to a midpoint is always going to be an ordered pair. You're going to have an x value and a y value. Alright, so if you need anything from this screen, go ahead and pause the video. I'm going to switch screens. Alright, so I'm just going to pick a bunch of random points and we're going to find the midpoint of them. So let's say I have the points -4, 5, and let's say 6, -1, and we'll try, I don't know, 7, -2, and we'll try 3, -5. Okay, so again, in order to find your midpoint, we're basically going to add up our x's and divide by 2, and we're going to add up our y values and divide by 2. So I'm going to go ahead and just put my ordered pair. I'm going to go ahead and put my division by 2. I'm going to color code these just a little bit. Alright, so again, what you're going to end up doing is you're going to add your x values together. So in this case, -4 plus 6. And we're going to end up adding our y values together. I'll put that in blue. So in this case, we're going to have 5 plus -1. Okay. So the only reason I did that in color is I want you to see, again, our x values are being added together, divide by 2, our y values being added together, divide by 2. And when most people find the x value, their midpoint, oftentimes they'll just add those in their head. You can also type them in your calculator. But -4 plus 6, we're doing the top first. -4 plus 6 is 2, so 2 divided by 2 gives us 1. And we're going to do the same thing for our y value. Basically, again, add our 2 y values. So we're going to add the 5 plus -1 together first, and then divide that by 2. So 5 plus -1, which is 4. 4 divided by 2 is 2. So this right here, that's my midpoint. That's our answer. We're done. Okay, so if you just have 2 ordered pairs, and it asks you to find the midpoint, again, add your x's, divide by 2, add your y's together, divide by 2, and that gives you the coordinate of your midpoint. And just remember, your midpoint is an ordered pair, so you do need to write this in ordered pair. Now with this one, both of my numbers divided together nicely, to a nice whole number. Alright, so let's try our second one here. So again, we're going to be adding our 2 x's and dividing by 2. We're going to be adding our 2 y values and dividing by 2. I'm going to color code these again. There's my x's, so it'll be 7 plus 3. And I think this is the color I used for my y values. So we're going to get -2 plus -5. Alright, so now we're ready to go ahead and start finding our midpoint. So again, we're going to add the x values right here together first. So 7 plus 3 is 10. 10 divided by 2 is 5. So that's the x value of my midpoint. Halfway done. For my y values, I'm going to add these two together. So I get negative 2 plus negative 5, which is negative 7. Now in this case, negative 7 does not divide 2 evenly. So oftentimes on the exam, they're just going to leave it negative 7 over 2. If you give me negative 3.5, you're not wrong, but I'll be honest with you. On your exam, they're going to keep them as fractions. So if you just get in the habit of, if the top number is an odd number, which means it will not divide 2 evenly, just leave it as it is. In this case, negative 7 over 2. I'm not going to mark you wrong if you give me the decimals, just I want you to be able to find them easier for your exam. Okay, so there's those two examples. If you need anything from that screen, go ahead and get it. I'm going to change the screen. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go through and write a big old word problem to this, but sometimes your midpoints are very straightforward on your homework and on your exam. But oftentimes they'll give you a word problem to them, so just kind of draw them out. Let's say, one of the ways that I see these sometimes is they'll say, you know, Jim lives at the coordinates of, I don't know, 8 and negative 3, and Sally lives at, I don't know, let's say 2, negative 7. You know, so one person lives at 8, negative 3, the other person lives at 2, negative 7, and they'll say something along the lines of, Bill lives halfway in between. So Bill lives halfway in between these two. Okay, and they'll ask, what are the coordinates of Bill's? Well, again, the first person is one of our endpoints, the other person's our other endpoint. B is our midpoint. So again, all we have to do is just add our two x's and divide by 2. That's the x value of my coordinate. And do the same thing with my y. So I'm going to add my two y values. So negative 3 plus negative 7 divided by 2. And this will give me Bill's location. And add these two. So 8 plus 2 is 10. 10 divided by 2 is 5. And add these two. Negative 3 plus negative 7 is negative 10. Negative 10 divided by 2 is a negative 5. So that's the coordinate of Bill's. So when you're reading those word problems, I know some of you guys don't really like word problems, but these oftentimes are not that bad. You might want to draw yourself a picture maybe. I'll get some students that'll go through and they'll do this. They'll say, you know, Jim lives here, Sally lives here, and we know that Bill is halfway in between. So that just helps them recognize, that was my dog by the way, help you recognize that in this case Bill is halfway in between the two. So a lot of them are straightforward. Some of them are not quite as straightforward. Sometimes they'll give you a midpoint and they'll give you an endpoint and ask you what's the other endpoint. So if you need anything, if you need anything from this screen, go ahead and get it. I'm going to change screens. Okay, so let's say that I have we're going to say we have line segment. This is what they'll look like sometimes. I'm going to say J to P. Okay. And let's say J is at, let's say 10, 5. And M is going to be at 4, 6, which is the midpoint, and M, the midpoint, and they'll say, what is P? Okay. Now the nice thing with these questions on the exam is they're multiple choice, so in reality all we're going to have to do is find them. So if you wanted to draw yourself kind of a picture of what you have, I have a line segment J to P, and oftentimes I didn't really want to write a lot of words on here, but oftentimes it'll say your midpoint, you know, for this segment, the halfway point of J to P is, in this case our midpoint is going to be at 4, 6. We got to figure out what J is. So again, since most of them are multiple choice, you can just kind of check. I'm just going to put 3 of them up here just for sake. let's say I have negative 3, 5. Let's say I have negative 2, let's say 7. And let's say I have negative 4, 6. Okay. Alright. Well, we know in this case that j is one of our endpoints. So we know that if we add the x's of j and one of these three multiple choices and divide by 2, we know that it should equal, in this case, 4. So really when I go through and do these, I just go through and check the x's. If the x's work, then I check the y. If that works, obviously I have my answer. So I'm going to test out a first. I know that if I add the two x values and divide by 2, it should equal 4. So let's try it real quick. Again, there's my dog. So let's say if I had negative 3 plus 10 divided by 2. Well, negative 3 plus 10 is 7. 7 divided by 2 does not equal 4, so automatically it's not A. So now I'm going to try B. Again, we're going to add our x's together. So I'm going to try negative 2 plus 10 divided by 2, and I want to see if that equals 4. Well, negative 2 plus 10 is 8. 8 divided by 2 is 4. So far the x works. Now let's check and make sure our y's work. So again, if we're going to add our y values, so 7 plus 5 divided by 2, I want to see if that equals 6. So 7 plus 5, which is 12. 12 divided by 2 is 6. That means right there, B is my answer. So again, just make sure you're careful when you read the question, because oftentimes what students do is they, 2 points and talks about midpoint, I add them together and divide by 2. Just be careful, because sometimes they'll give you a end point and a midpoint, and you have to find the other end point. So just carefully read it and draw out a picture if needed.